Assassins to a New Year's special edition of the Dark Assassins podcast, the show that dives deep into not just technology, but the concepts, software, and procedures behind it all, and explains it so simply that even your grandma can understand it. As always, I'm your host, the Dark Assassin. So Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to 2023. Well, I guess technically it's still 2022. At least that's the recording that I'm making now. And when this goes live, I guess it technically goes live on New Year's Eve. But hey, sue me. It's close enough, all right? If I wanted to get something out for New Year's, this was, as good as it's going to get with the release schedule that we have here. Which, speaking of the release schedule, that is something that I want to get into a little bit on this episode. And I kind of want to, seeing that it's New Year's, I figured we'd do something a little bit special and a little different than a normal episode. Partly because this isn't going to be a normal episode since I'm going to be recording it ahead of time.
But Dark Assassin, all of your episodes are recorded ahead of time because this is a podcast.
Wow! Yes! Thank you, Captain Obvious. You're right. Wow! Mind blown. So yeah, but obviously when I'm talking about this being pre-recorded, I am going to be on vacation, celebrating Christmas and the New Year with my family. So obviously I'm going to be recording this ahead of time because who wants to work while they're on vacation? So I figured that because of all of that, I figured it would be a good opportunity with the year ending and a new year beginning to kind of take a step back and kind of look back at the past year, see where we've come, look forward into the future, and go from there. See where we end up. And depending on how much time we have, I haven't really done much scripting at all for this episode. This is going to be a very, very much off the cuff kind of a thing. But the main things that I want to do is kind of talk about my initial goals setting out for making this podcast, how some things have kind of changed as I've gotten into making more and more episodes, things that I've added, things that, kind of became a thing that I didn't necessarily plan on, and then things I'm looking forward to in the future. And then also, because this podcast also gets posted on Spotify, Spotify has their Wrapped thing. I don't use Spotify personally, but I haven't looked at it yet, so I figured it would be pretty cool if we, kind of do a live, air quotes, live reaction to that to kind of see what they have as far as like the statistics go about the podcast. I think that would be pretty cool. And then kind of, go over some things that I'm looking forward to for 2023. Then if we still have time after that, I figured it would be fun to answer some of the top, 5, 10, depends on how much time we have, questions that people have about technology and software development and all that good stuff and answer them. And then obviously next week we'll be back with a more regular episode. There'll probably be some nerdy things that I'll be doing because I know, at least as of right now, as of the recording of this episode, which I know you heard about in last week's episode, my Mac OS installs all kind of decided to die at the same time. So that was cool. So working through that. So I'll probably have additional updates for you next week once I get back to everything. But with that being said, let's get into this. So when did I start this podcast? So I started this podcast back in April of this year. Kind of hard to believe it's been that long. And believe it or not, if you go back to the very beginning of the podcast and you look at the release schedule. It was it kind of started out every week, and then there were a couple weeks there in the first couple months where I didn't have one. And that was mainly because initially when I started out with this podcast, I didn't intend for it to be a weekly thing. I basically intended it to be kind of a maybe twice a month type deal. And then as I kind of started making episodes, I just kept coming up with ideas, and I figured, hey, I got an idea. I might as well make an episode about this. And if you go back to the very beginning, that's because I hadn't fully fleshed out everything yet. Most of the episodes that I make are generally around the 40 to 50-ish minute mark. Usually the sweet spot is like 43 to 47, I think, is kind of around what we've been averaging as far as episode lengths. Then we'll have, the one that'll go long and it'll be like 50 some minutes. And then we had that one networking one that was like an hour and 11 minutes or something like that. And then we've had another one, I think. I forget what that topic was offhand. That was over an hour also. So we do sometimes go long. But in the very beginning, the episode I made about VPN companies lying to you, I hadn't come up with the idea of Operation Core Dump yet. So that was the only topic that I had at the time, which was the VPN thing. And I didn't know what else to do. So that's why that episode was only like, I think 30 minutes or somewhere in that ballpark. It was pretty short. And I think it's the shortest episode that I've released. So now, obviously, that I probably would have lumped that in as either an Operation Core Dump video or episode, or heck, it might have actually been long enough if I was doing the whole what nerdy things have I been up to this week, because as you guys definitely know, that can sometimes take up the majority of an episode. So that actually might have put it over and, put it into that 40 some minutes-ish area. But yeah, initially when I started out, I was just thinking of doing, maybe twice a month or so. And then, yeah, like I said, I just kind of kept coming up with ideas. I'd be like walking around, and then, because one thing I like to do is go on walks, and it helps me think about things. And sometimes when I'm on walks, I'll like come up with ideas of things like, that would be an interesting thing to talk about. And then I'll kind of like think through things that I want to say for the podcast, and then I'll kind of like write them down on my phone. And then before I actually go to record the podcast, I'll put that into like a document and then highlight the main topics that I want to make sure that I hit. I don't always hit them. I know, not last episode, but the one before that, I definitely missed a big point that I wanted to make. Well, I guess it wasn't a huge point, but it was like an analogy that I wanted to make, which I didn't hit. And I'm pretty sure I highlighted it, but maybe I didn't. I don't know. But yeah, that's a little behind the scenes of what goes on. Sometimes, though, like this episode, I really don't have any notes at all. It's pretty much just not a blank document, but it's just like, a couple bullets here or there, like as very, very broad topics. If I don't necessarily, go through monologues in my head of like, I wouldn't say rehearsing, but just kind of like thinking through, like if I was recording the podcast right now, like what I would say kind of in the moment. And then I kind of write that down. But sometimes I don't write anything down, and it's like this episode where the document, I think, is okay, it's technically 2 pages, but that second page is literally just the show notes that I write up to put, in the show notes of the actual episode, which you can see down below. So it's really less than a page, to be honest, because the first, like, quarter of this page is, like, the title and the intro, and then the bottom quarter-ish of the page is the like the outro, like hope you enjoyed listening to the episode, all that jazz. So really only about like half of the document's actually filled with actual text of things to talk about. So yeah. So I pretty much just kind of got on a roll there of like coming up with episodes, and then I looked back on my releases, and I realized that I was on this really consistent streak of releasing every week, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to keep an every week release schedule. Now, sometimes, I'm going to be honest with you guys, it has not been easy trying to keep a weekly release schedule between work, grad school, and just trying to come up with topics by myself sometimes can be kind of challenging. The topics part can be hard because but especially before I came up with the concept of Operation Core Dump, it was really hard sometimes to figure out, like, can I make like a full episode out of this? Am I going to be able to do that? And now it's because I came up with Operation Core Dump. It's a little bit easier because I don't necessarily have to think, can I make this, a full like 30 or 40 minute conversation? I can, if it's only like 10, 15 minutes, that's fine. So yeah. And then other times, like, I just have trouble coming up with stuff, which is why I always ask you guys at the end of every episode if you have any questions or comments or anything that you want me to talk about in future episodes, to please let me know, because it makes my life a lot easier, and that's for sure. And also, I think it would be helpful to you guys too, because if you're asking me questions, that's kind of giving me insight of what you guys want to hear about. So otherwise, it's just me kind of, coming up with random topic ideas, which I mean, sometimes, I like to think that most of the topics I come up with are pretty good. Sometimes, I'm kind of about the topic, but sometimes I, really get into it. But I think if that's, which I guess I don't necessarily want to go into 2023 quite yet, but that's kind of one of the things that I'm looking forward to in 2023 is to, be able to do more like software developer here, more like listener-based questions and try to answer those. So I mentioned Operation Core Dump quite a bit, and that was, I think when I originally made the first episode with it, I kind of talked about it. But it was basically, I wanted to come up with an idea of how can I cover multiple episodes or multiple topics in a single episode without like having, one title. Like, the problem I was running into was like, how do I title something, like, as far as an episode goes, that covers multiple topics, right? Because I don't want to be like the clickbaity YouTuber guy, which, in fairness, this isn't even on YouTube anyway, but you know what I'm talking about, the clickbaity person that has like the super like grabby title, and then that really never gets talked about until like the last like 5 minutes, which for a podcast, that's like the very end. But I guess it feels like a YouTube video. It's like, the big reveal that happens at, the very end of the video, and it's not even that interesting. So I didn't want to do that. So I wanted to figure out how I could come up with a way to talk about multiple things and keep it, put it into one episode. And Operation Core Dump was kind of what I came up with. I think it's a decent concept. I know when I mentioned it when I first the first episode of it, the point was, in software development, a core dump is when you like dump all the memory and everything, and kind of the point of Operation Core Dump was me to just dump a bunch of information at you guys on various topics, and that was kind of the point. So yeah, that's kind of where that came from. And then another thing that kind of just, I guess, sort of happened was the whole what nerdy stuff have I been up to this week, because it it first started out kind of as like it was, something for me to talk about. And then I started to note, like, it wasn't every week, obviously, but then I started to notice that, like, just at a happenstance, it kind of was coming in like multiple, like, it wasn't every week, but it was like every other week. And then it was like every week, and then there was an off week, and then it was every week again, and then it was an off week. And I was like, I should just make this a part of the episode. So then that's when I, fully made it a part of the episode. And that's when I actually added the jingle to it, was when I was like, okay, this is going to be a legit segment in the podcast now. And I've heard feedback from some of you that have actually really enjoyed that segment. So I guess I'll keep doing it. I think it's kind of fun, to talk about the stuff that I'm doing. And the main reason I like doing that isn't like to necessarily brag about the stuff that I do, but more so to kind of give you guys inspiration for like either topics or projects or something that you can do. Maybe inspire you to go off and do something. And I think, because as I've mentioned a lot on this podcast, that's kind of that's kind of a big part of it, right? Is for you to do, personal projects, have a home lab, and all this kind of stuff to like grow and develop your skills. And that was another kind of reason why I wanted to make the podcast in the first place, was because I wanted to try to help people to better understand and learn technology. And I know I say in the intro, explaining it so easy that even your grandma can understand it. And for what it's worth, I kind of, at least from what I can tell, I don't think there's a ton of grandmas listening to this podcast. I think it's mostly like, at least from what I can tell, I don't know how accurate this is, because my analytics are kind of wonky and all over the place. But I think the majority of people are kind of on the younger side of things, which is totally cool. I guess so. The other part of it was, try to be able to help you understand technology. And then when your relatives, especially now that we're at the holiday season, once they start asking you, calling up the tech support, which is you, how does this work, or how do I do this, and all that stuff, then you'll hopefully have some more insight. So the main reason that I guess that I made this was I kind of wanted to help people and try to give them a better understanding of how things work, because I noticed a lot of the times, like when I would watch like tutorial videos or read articles on, how certain technologies work, generally they did a good job of explaining it to someone that already has like a good foundation of technological background. But for someone that doesn't have that background, it's just going like straight over their head. So I wanted to, I don't know how well a good job that I've done, but my goal was to try to kind of be that gap, be that bridge point to help bridge the people without the technical background to be able to understand the technical concepts. And obviously not be a master at it, because in order to like master, some of these concepts like software development, networking, server infrastructure, all that good stuff, you do have to have a technical background to be able to really understand how it works and, actually implement this kind of stuff. But at least you could kind of understand how it works, and it's not like just like this complete magic to you. At least that's kind of the goal. So yeah, I think that's pretty much kind of, where things been, kind of a little bit of the behind the scenes stuff of the podcast. So now actually let's get into that wrapped thing. Let's see what that's all about. So let me pull it up here. So it says, in 2022, you did your thing. The people loved it. Okay, let's see what's on the next. I guess slide. I don't know if these are slides or what these really are. It says I created 130 or 1,322 minutes of new content. Interesting. Although I know this is a little outdated since I first saw this pop up, I think in the beginning. It was either the end of November or beginning of December. I can't remember which, but it's been up for a little bit, so that number actually might be a little bit higher. But this number is actually pretty interesting to me. It says that's more than 92% of other creators in the technology category, which that's pretty interesting. I guess either other people in the technology category don't upload much, or I don't know what the deal is there, because I mean I mentioned I only started this podcast in April, and I've done most weeks but not every week. I know now this is going to be episode number 37, and I don't know, quick math here, I don't know what the average podcast length was, but I know we're around like the 40-some minute mark. So if we do like, we've also had some lower, so I'm just gonna estimate and say like 45, and then multiply that by, what's this, 37, so about like 1,600 hours. So yeah, I guess that is a little low, but it's still interesting to me to see that that's more than 92% of other creators in the technology category. It's kind of interesting. He says, you can't hear us, but we're clapping right now. Okay, sure. Let's see what's next here. Ooh, your podcast loves to travel, apparently, which actually that is one thing that I've noticed. One thing that always astounds me is when I go like look at some of the analytics, like seeing like the country demographics, and just kind of out of nowhere, like a country just shooting up like completely out of nowhere. Like the US is obviously the highest because that's where I'm from, but recently I want to say, let me actually go check this real quick. There was one country in particular, Brazil, just came out of Brazil and Singapore were two countries that like just came out of complete nowhere and like grabbed a noticeable chunk of the percentage of the geographic listeners. So I guess a shout out to you guys over there in Brazil and Singapore. So I guess that's what it's referring to, that the podcast loves to travel. So yes, technically, the Dark Assassins podcast is a global podcast. We have fellow assassins all over the world, which I think is pretty cool. Yeah, and it says your top country is the United States. That's not too surprising, as I mentioned. Let's see what we got next here. Something magical happened on 25th of September and October 1st. You had 214% more listeners compared to your average week. Oh boy. That's another thing that I found interesting. Just kind of like periodically looking at the analytics, like there would just be these random times just like completely out of nowhere where there'd be this massive spike just out of nowhere. And I would try to look to see like what episodes they were being listened to, and I couldn't really get a gauge on it, but it was really interesting to see like that massive spike, and then it just kind of goes back to more normal of what it's doing. So now it asks, what are the Dark Assassins podcast listeners like exactly? ? That's interesting. I don't know, what are you guys like? Oh boy, it's calculating listeners' personalities here. Your listener's personality is the adventurer. I guess you guys are pretty adventurous. Your listener's podcast personality is adventurer. Your listeners venture out into the unknown, searching for fresher podcasts and gems yet to be found. Which I guess I kind of see where they're going at here, because, this is a very, very, very small podcast, very, very new podcast, as a matter of fact. So I guess with a combination of the small listener base we got here, the small tight-knit community we got, and the fact that it's new, you guys are adventurous going out into unpopular or new podcasts, I guess, trying to find new ones rather than all the big ones that everyone listens to. So I guess that's where they're going. At first I was wondering if it was like gonna go with like people usually listen to it while they're out and about. Let's see. I created 1 poll and 2 Q&As. Interesting. Listeners joined in one time. I guess I had a listener join when I had one of those polls. I don't know. Or maybe it was join in. Dark Assassins Podcast. Thank you for sharing your podcast with the world. You're welcome, Spotify. Let's see. We still got some more. The animations on this is kind of wild. Speaking of sharing, we made something special for you. Oh boy. Do I want to know what this is? Here we go. More. Oh boy, they made like fancy I don't know what to call it. It's like logos where it shows like the Dark Assassins podcast logo, and then it has like a colored background, and then it shows like stats like episodes, minutes, and countries, which is kind of cool. Oh, and yeah, so so this did confirm my hunch. So I said we're on episode 37, and this only says 29 episodes, so that's definitely where that discrepancy is coming from. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So yeah, that was interesting. I know it probably wasn't quite as interesting for you guys since, you know, this is a podcast after all and you couldn't see any of that, but yeah, that was I actually hadn't looked at any of that before, so that was total 100% live reaction to that. So now with 2022 behind us, getting into 2023, so as I kind of mentioned, one thing that I really want to do in 2023 is get more input from you all, to kind of gather more questions from you, get more of your feedbacks, hear what you like, hear maybe what you want changed, that kind of thing. Just get your input, see how I can make the podcast better. Because we've had a couple episodes on here where I've answered some of your guys' questions, and I'll be honest, those are probably some of my favorite episodes. Well, the one that specifically comes to mind was one of you asked about the Xserve. Like we had that kind of what's the word I'm looking for? We had that segment for a couple weeks where it was just like nonstop Xserve content because that's what I was doing. And one of you asked, like, the Xserve, you know, basically like the Xserve sounds really cool. Like, why did Apple kill it off? And that was honestly one of my favorite episodes to like actually research and look into, and you know just do, mainly partly because it was one of you asking the question. So like, you know, I had more of a driving factor to make it as good of an episode as I can, since I know one of you asked, so I wanted to, you know, try to give the best answer I could, rather than me kind of coming up with some like hypothetical random topic or question and just kind of rambling on about it. So yeah, because one thing that I know some people like to do, like when they're talking about like content and all that, is like, I want to reach, you know, X number of subscribers or X number of listeners or X number of listen time or whatever. I don't don't really have a good perspective on any of that, so I don't want to be like, yeah, my goal is to reach, you know, X, you know, number of new listeners, and then like 2 months later, like we're already past that, or that number never happens and we're like half that by the end of next year. So like, I have absolutely no idea how to gauge any of that. So that's why my goal kind of plays into that, but also is different in this aspect of I want, more engagement from you guys to, be able to help answer your questions and whatnot. Because I know, especially for me personally, I don't, the podcasts that I listen to, they always ask, if you have questions or whatever, send them in to us. I never send in any questions. So I know there's probably a lot of you out there that are like me that just don't send in any questions, either because you don't have any questions, you're just here to listen and enjoy the content, which that is totally cool, or you're, I don't know, what was that other one I was thinking? Anyway, or I'm just, so good at answering all these questions that it leaves you with nothing, which I highly doubt that last one, because I know for a fact after I've recorded some episodes, I'll be thinking and be like, man, I should have said that in this episode, or man, I should have brought that up. So I know there are definitely things that I don't hit in every single episode, or don't go necessarily as deep as I'd like, or any of that stuff. So yeah, definitely if you got questions or comments or anything that you're interested, if there's any kind of vague technology concept that you think would be interesting for me to talk about for some length of time, please shoot me an email at contact@darkassassinsinc.com. There's always a link in the show notes down below for that. And then another thing, which I kind of want to get your guys' input on this too, is one thing that I kind of thought would be kind of cool would be either do some kind of I don't know if interview is the right word, but bring other people on the podcast and have conversations with other people. Obviously that wouldn't be an every week thing, because that is a lot of work and a lot of coordination, and I don't have that many contacts, but I do know maybe a couple people that I don't know if they'd be interested, but could potentially try to convince to come on here and talk with me for a while. And if you guys are interested in something like that, I think it'd be maybe interesting it'd be like a nice a change of pace, I guess you could say. Obviously it wouldn't be every episode, because like I said, that's a lot of work and I don't have that many contacts, but I think it could be interesting, depending on what the topic is, for sure. And then I guess at the end of the day, the last thing going into 2023 is just continue to provide you guys with content, and just try to make it so the content I make for you all is better, and I can give better answers and grow my knowledge base, so I can then grow your knowledge base, and we can all kind of grow together, and all improve our skills as a whole. So we got some extra time here, so let's look into answering some top questions in technology and software development. So here's a couple good ones on software development. So the first question here is, what is an abstract class? So an abstract class is basically a class that has some methods that are undefined and are meant to be defined later. So I guess you could I'm trying to think of an example here on the fly. So I guess if you had a person, like we talked about the person class, I guess if you had a person class, the default person might not have an occupation, for example, but then you have each subsect of people that actually do have an occupation. So the person class could be the abstract class, and then you would have, the software developer class that, would then set the occupation because they actually have one, and that kind of thing. So that actually goes into this next question here, which is, it says, what is inheritance? So inheritance, is an idea that, you have multiple classes that inherit or take attributes from another class. So the big one here, going back to the person class, you have that default person, which basically is attributes that every person has, the name, the age, all that good stuff. And then you have your individual types of people, like the software developer, the teacher, the librarian, that kind of thing, which they're all people, but they're different kinds of people. Some other common ones that people like to do when talking about inheritance is like vehicles, the vehicle class, which is just kind of like a broad, I guess potentially abstract class. And then you have, the different types of vehicles, like you have your cars, your trucks, your motorcycles, sports cars. Could potentially even throw airplanes in there too, although those would probably be their own separate thing. So yeah, that's kind of inheritance. Let's see what else we got here. So this next one is about sorting algorithms. So when it comes down to like sorting and searching algorithms, they kind of go hand in hand. So when basically it basically depends on what your architecture is. So because depending on how you sort your data would potentially depend on how you search your data. Because first off, if your data is not sorted, searching you can't use any kind of search optimizations. Like you can't do any kind of like binary tree type searching, or I forget exactly what the name is offhand, but the searching where you basically just keep cutting the array, or the data you're trying to search in half. Binary search, that's what it is. You keep cutting it in half until eventually you find the value you're looking for, which obviously that won't work unless your data is sorted. But when it comes to sorting data, this is where you kind of get into what we in the software development world called the big O, which is essentially like how long will this function take to run, generally in the worst case. So there's a bunch of different kinds. Obviously the best is a big O of n, which basically means it'll take the longest time it could take is the length of the array, which is the best possible case. Although if you're doing any kind of sorting, that's basically impossible. If you have found a way to sort an array that isn't already sorted in n time every single time, you have a multi-million-dollar algorithm right there. Let me tell you that. So the general idea is you want to have some kind of log n time, like n log n, or some log based time, because that it doesn't like explode exponentially like you would have with like a 2 to the n or n squared time or something like that. Now, the ones with, the log types of time are generally a lot more difficult to implement than a, like a n squared or a 2 to the n time. Which I guess n squared is probably the more common one, which that's pretty much your classic. You can think that as your classic like insertion sort or your bubble sort, which is pretty much you're comparing every single index to every other index. So the only way to do that is, all right, so I have my first number here. Let me compare it to every single other number to figure out where it goes. All right, so that's good. Now let me take my second number. Let me compare it to every other number. So obviously you can see if you have a small array, that's not necessarily a huge deal. But once you're getting into massive scales and, massive data sets, that's not exactly ideal. And it explodes exponentially the more elements you have. So definitely not ideal. Same thing if you're trying to do like a linear search. You pretty much start at the front and go to the end. Now, I mentioned searching kind of is only effective if your data is sorted. Although the nice thing with a linear search, while it's not necessarily as efficient as, say, a binary search, if your data isn't sorted whatsoever, then a linear search is probably your best bet, because you're guaranteed to find it. And two, I guess it technically is end time, because you're only going through the list once. So worst case, it's at the very end and you go through every element. But obviously, if your data is sorted, then the binary search is obviously the best, because if you have numbers sorted from 1 to 100 and you're looking for, say, I don't know, 13, basically how the binary search works, if you're not familiar, is you start right smack dab in the middle at 50, and then you're like, all right, so the number I'm looking for is less than that, so we'll throw everything greater than 50 away, take the half again, so that puts us at 25. Our number is still less than that, so we take everything greater and throw it away, and then you just keep doing that process until you eventually get to the number you're looking for. So obviously you can see, if you have a really large, array of numbers, you chop down your size really, really quickly. As you could see there, when we started, we threw half of the array out at the very beginning, and we only searched one number. Whereas if you're doing a linear search, you don't exactly, once you search one number, you're like, okay, I know it's not this one. Let me check the next one. Nope, not that one. So I know it's not these two. No, but by the time you're doing a binary search, by the time you get to the second search element, you already got rid of, 3/4 of the array. So the idea of being able to chop everything in half is definitely very beneficial. All right, so let's see. I think we still got some time for maybe one or two more questions here. So let's see what else we got. So here's a kind of funny one. One's not necessarily about software development, but technology. It's about how might developments in technology change the way schools are run. You guys already know my answer to that one. Let's see, what else do we have here? Let's see. All right, so here's I think we can combine some of these about technology. So let's see, what are some advantages of technology? What kinds of technology are you excited about? What does it mean to be smarter than a machine? How do we make smarter machines or computers? So basically, I guess, kind of the future of technology. So kind of, where do I see it going? So I think, as far as the future of technology, I think AI and machine learning is definitely here to stay. We've gone through a couple rounds of it. If you want to look into it and do some research on it, there's the AI revolutions, I believe is what it's called. There was one, I want to say back in, the 80s, but I could be wrong about that. And then there was another one, and then it kind of went into the AI winter, I guess they call it. And then there was another kind of resurgence, and then it kind of died off again. And now it's back. And I think technology, as far as the chips and the GPUs and all this stuff, I think is at a point now where it's really going to become a staple and take over. I mean, we've already seen it kind of, running, our daily lives. I mean, everyone in their pocket right now with a smartphone has access to some kind of AI smart assistant, whether that's Siri or Google Assistant or Alexa or, whoever it is. Now, with all this machine learning, that comes lots and lots of data, specifically your data. So that's kind of one thing that I am definitely very skeptical about. I think, all this artificial intelligence is cool, but that data's got to come from somewhere. And I think, how do we, ethically source this data rather than just, spying on people and stealing and harvesting their data and selling it to people? Which I think that's definitely going to be something that we're really going to, see in the future. I mean, we saw a few episodes ago when we talked about that GitHub Copilot, the AI robot thing that's supposed to help you write code, and it got basically busted, stealing people's code off GitHub. So, because that was the data it's trained on. So, and then as we're also seeing now, there's new AI things out there called DALL-E 2, and ChatGPT. Both are like two new AI machine learning models out there. Dolly 2 is the one that like generates like images, like you give it a search query, and then I think within like 15 seconds or something, it comes up with like, I don't know how many pictures like resembling what you searched for, which is definitely pretty cool. But I think some people have also mentioned, like if you ask it for, a painting in the style of Monet or something, or in the style of some artist, it'll look very similar to that artist. And I think I've also heard like people have seen kind of like artifacting, like where a signature would kind of go. So I think there's definitely going to be some hurdles that machine learning and artificial intelligence is going to have to overcome in regards to how they're sourcing and gathering their data to train their models on. But I think in general, I think that's definitely going to kind of be the future, unless regulators or someone is able to snuff them out because of some kind of copyright laws or other laws about data harvesting or something. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know any of the specifics and all that stuff, but I do potentially seeing that being a pretty large hurdle and a roadblock. I mean, we're already seeing it now, and we're still, kind of in the early stages. And as usual, the lawmakers are way behind the 8 ball on it. So once they kind of catch up in the next, I don't know, 5-10 years or so, who knows where AI and machine learning is going to be. But I definitely think that's going to be the future. And as much as I hate to admit it, I think this whole like smart home revolution is probably going to stick around, mainly because people find it so convenient. Although there is in the home lab community, there's this thing called Home Assistant, which is basically a way that you can like self-host all your like IoT devices, which I haven't gotten into, but I think if I ever do get into the smart home space, that'll be how I do it. Everything's self-hosted. Any kind of Internet of Things device is going to definitely be on its own VLAN, going to have no access to the outside internet and no access to anything else on my network, and basically make sure that is locked down. There have been way too many stories of IoT devices getting hacked and people spying on people through IoT devices. It's a mess. But yeah. So I think the future, definitely for sure, we're going to keep seeing improvements on AI and machine learning models. And I think it'll be interesting once I know people have already talking about, the Turing test, I think, is just gone at this point. I think a lot of these, depending on the AI model, like people would be definitely fooled and it'd pass the Turing test. But obviously, it's not technically a general AI at this point. So I think I think that might start to be kind of a conversation in the future as well. I know there was a couple months ago, I think, some guy working on some project at Google was, touting about how this, whatever chatbot or AI that Google's working on was actually like legit sentient. And there was kind of a big hubbub about that. So I think, definitely going into the future, we're probably going to see a lot more of those discussions start coming up as, more and more companies come out with their AI and machine learning models. And especially once they aren't necessarily on, your phone. And if Elon ever comes out with his Tesla bot or whatever it is, and actually have like these machine learning AI models and intelligences like in actual robots that like move around and can like interact with you rather than just, on your phone or on your computer, I think that's definitely going to be when people are going to start really asking those kinds of questions. So yeah, definitely a lot. The future is definitely, I think, very much AI, machine learning. So if that's something that you're interested in, you're into, you definitely have a career path, I think, for sure. So I think that's probably about all the time we got for this episode. So I hope you enjoyed it. Like I mentioned, we'll be back next week with a more of a regular episode. We'll talk about the nerdy stuff I did, because I'm sure there's probably going to be a lot to talk about there. And yeah, any other topics that I come up with, or if you guys have any topics that you want to send in, be sure to send me an email at contact@darkassassins.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, I ask that you leave it a rating and review, and subscribe to the Dark Assassins podcast if you haven't done so already. Also, be sure to share with a friend or family member who you think would enjoy the episode. I know this wasn't a normal episode for us, but still, nonetheless, I think there was some good tidbits in here. And if you have any questions, like I've mentioned, feel free to send me an email at contact@darkassassinsinc.com. Love hearing from you guys. Click the link in the show notes below for that. And that's going to do it for me in this episode of the Dark Assassins podcast. Until next time, my fellow assassins, remember, bull nothing equals true. If action not equal to null, return true. I'll see you next time on the Dark Assassins podcast.